Hello and welcome back to Beauty Bee, where today we are going into another video on Urban Decay as part of this Urban Decay themed weekend. The first portion of this video is going to be about why I think the Naked line is not as overplayed as many people seem to think. And in the second half of the video, I will be illustrating that point using some mock-ups of potential Naked palettes that I think would appeal to both the casual consumer as well as those of us in the beauty community. Now, I feel that there is a very reasonable argument for why we should leave the Naked palettes in the 2010s. There have been 10 of these 12-pan Naked palettes released in the past 10 years, and that's not to mention the little offshoots, the Naked Basics, the Naked Ultimate Basics, the Petite Heat. And additionally, how do you market a Naked palette, a neutral palette of some type, to a segment of the population within the beauty community that's become so used to bright color that we think that rainbow palettes are overdone and a bit boring these days. But I can also understand Urban Decay's reluctance to give up this Naked line. I mean, it has a huge amount of name recognition, even among more casual consumers. If you look for best-selling palettes on Sephora or Ulta, you will almost always find at least one of these Naked palettes within the first maybe 10 results, and it's been like that for about a decade at this point. I was trying to film with natural light, but it's apparently just a little bit too cloudy for that today. I distinctly remember taking an online quiz with a friend in probably 2013, 2014, trying to figure out what our undertones were so that we would know if the Naked 1, Naked 2, or Naked 3 would suit us best. I didn't end up purchasing any of the palettes. I was more interested in figuring out which drugstore dupes maybe I could pick up that would really work out for me. But putting myself back in that position, thinking back to when I was 19, 20 years old, there is no way that I could have even conceived of essentially gambling $50 on an eyeshadow palette that wasn't super neutral. I needed to know that that item would look good on me. I needed to know that I would be able to use it. I was pretty clueless about makeup. I was just in the put something on your lid and maybe it looks better than it did without anything on it. And those super basic, incredibly neutral, very difficult really to mess up kinds of colors that those palettes offered were very alluring to me as a 19-year-old who was just starting to get into makeup. And I think the YouTube beauty community has largely moved past that. I know that I now don't really worry when I get an eyeshadow palette that there are shades that I'm not going to be able to work with at all. They're just too colorful. That's not a problem I have now. I've learned how to work with color. I'm overall just better at applying my makeup. I think that I can make most things work for me to some extent. However, not everyone who uses makeup is in the YouTube beauty community. There are still the 19-year-old Iris equivalents who are just getting into makeup or never get into makeup. And then there are tons and tons of other people who don't want to really get into makeup. They just want to put something on their eyes to go to prom or go out to a date. Maybe they want to feel a little bit more polished in the office. Whatever, it's a little bit more utilitarian for them. And the Naked line is probably a huge draw for that type of consumer. I can understand why Urban Decay is reluctant to let it go. And I think they can have the best of both worlds. Keep the interest of the individuals in the beauty community while also not scaring off more casual consumers by broadening their horizons a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little, on what it means to having neutral eyeshadow palettes. And to be clear, they've been doing this since the beginning. I mean, the Naked palette, the original, is largely brown. It goes a little bit into gold, but it's pretty brown. The next one, Naked 2, is a little more taupe. Naked 3 goes more rosy. Naked Smoky is really not brown at all. It's a gray, blue, and black palettes. And it seems with every release, the spectrum of exactly what Urban Decay considers to be nudes or neutrals grows just a little bit. And now we get into the fun part where we look at the mock-ups that I've made. The first one I'm calling Naked on Ice because I couldn't not call it that. This is probably the least neutral of the bunch in that it is a gray and light blue palette. And though we just talked about the Naked Smoky and how that was also a gray palette, I feel that this is different enough to still warrant inclusion. The Naked Smoky palette, as the name would suggest, skews very dark, while this keeps to much lighter shades. To live up to the name Naked on Ice, I felt like we needed to have quite a few really light shades that were shimmery to give that sort of crystalline dimension that you do see with snowflakes and icicles. There really is not a lot of bright color in this palette. There is a navy, there's a mid-tone blue shimmer, and there is a light robin's egg blue matte. So you could do an entirely blue look if you really wanted to. However, most of the looks that you could get out of this palette would be pretty neutral. You could get an entirely gray look, you could get gray with a lot of multi-dimensional interesting finishes, you could get gray with some little pops of blue, and I think that makes it versatile enough to be a worthy addition to someone like me's collection without being too intimidating to someone who is less into color and a little bit less familiar with makeup, perhaps. I personally did not hate the Naked Ultraviolet. However, I think that with the name like Ultraviolet, it probably should have looked a little bit more like this. I think that this is, again, a really useful palette because it does keep to purple, but it is a take on what an all purple palette could look like while still being neutral. My goal with these palettes was to offer color schemes where you could make several different looks that you could wear to the office, as well as several different looks that you could wear on a night out or to a party or whatever fun things you are probably not actually doing right now. I've divided this Naked Ultraviolet palette up into 4 quads. The first quad is very light and very cool toned. It's very gray based. The middle quad goes a bit further into pink. It is much warmer. And then the last quad, you actually go a little bit into blue and gray along with some very dark purples. And I think you could achieve a very daytime, super wearable look using either of the first 2 quads, just sticking to one of those, and then you could get something that is a little bit darker and a little more smoky by reaching into that 3rd quad. Overall, I think you could get a nice variety of purple looks. With a purple palette, I really like to see something that goes a little bit blue in addition to going a little bit more on the pinky red-violet side of purple, because I just feel that that blue side is a little less common and a little bit more interesting, and I just like blue. I feel that I could get a lot of different looks out of this and not get bored. There are definitely shades in this palette that I think I would pan, especially that 3rd shade. That's beautiful. That light silvery purple, I would get so much use out of that. I basically have that shade. I've owned it only for maybe 4 or 5 months, and I have hit pan on it, so definitely right up my alley. I think palette number 3, if these were actually available, is the one that would tempt me most. This one I'm calling Naked Evergreen, and like the last one, I have set this up in quads. The first quad is very yellow based, takes on green. The second quad is more of a teal green, and then the third quad is more of a what I consider a straight green, sort of a middle of the road forest green. Like with the last palette, there's some warmer takes on green, there's some cooler takes on green, and I think that gives you quite a bit of versatility. I also think that the fact that there are these varying tones, but they are all quite muted, makes this pretty everyday wearable, even for people who aren't super comfortable with makeup. I can see several different ways that I could wear even these teals to the office and be perfectly fine with it. For example, I could see myself putting this fourth color, this super light sage green, over all of my lid and blending it up into the crease, and then popping a metallic teal as liner. I think that would be subtly interesting, but still appropriate for most settings, and it's something that I could see myself wearing quite a bit. There are several mid-tone shimmers that I think would make super easy one and done shadow looks, and a really dark olive smoky eye is gorgeous. It's classic because it's still smoky and it's still monochromatic, but adding that green gives a little bit of extra interest, and I feel like it's a little bit more approachable to a lot of beginners than a black-based smoky eye, because, oh goodness, I remember trying to put on black eyeshadow and blend it up for the first time. It was not my best look, or anywhere in the top 1,000. And then for the final palette, we veer away from the monochromatic color schemes with Naked Prairie. In this, we have some more reddish shades and we have some more green shades. And before you guess, yes, I did break this one up into quads. The first is a rather yellow-green quad, the second is sort of coral based, and the third is more of a red and pink and mauve quad. And you could make a look that would be very office appropriate, very everyday wearable, just by sticking to any one of those quads. And you can get something that's a little bit more colorful, a little bit more interesting, but doesn't rock the boat too much by dipping into a couple of the different quads. While the Naked Evergreen is probably the palette that is most tempting to me personally, I think that this one would probably bring in the most people from the beauty community because it is a bit more colorful and a bit less monochromatic than the other 3 palettes. I also think that this would be a great companion palette to the Wild West one that they just put out, where that goes very southwest with these sort of warm orangey browns and teals. This has some warm greens and coral and a little bit of pink, and I think that you could make some really interesting looks. All right, so there's where I think Urban Decay should take the Naked Palette franchise. Let me know what you think of these mock-ups that I've made. Let me know if any of them would interest you, and I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope I'll see you next time. Bye!